turn.
In 1981, President Ronald Reagan was shot outside the Washington Hilton. The country held its breath. Shock and fear reverberated throughout the nation. Minutes later, in the operating room, Reagan looked at his surgeon and said, "I hope you're a Republican." The room erupted in laughter. Even in the shadow of an assassination attempt, Reagan didn't shy away from using humor. Later, at a public event, a balloon loudly popped. Reagan didn't flinch. He smiled and quipped.
Missed me.
Reagan was called the great communicator for a reason. His humor was spontaneous, disarming, and deeply human. But he's not alone. From Lincoln to Trump to Zelensky to Obama, leaders have used humor in ways that shape history, diplomacy, and even survival.
It's funny, you need at least the attitude of a comedian when you're doing this business.
Everyone has their own unique comedic style. Donald Trump, for example, especially stands out.
You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie O'Donnell.
No, it wasn't.
Even beyond the political world, humor is more than politics. It's a cultural language. It's late-night satire, stand-up in small clubs, jokes whispered under oppressive regimes, and laughter that defies fear. Humor is power.
Yeah, I think that comedy usually is rooted in a shared sense of truth. And we're in a moment when we have a lot of trouble agreeing on what the truth is.
It can diffuse a situation if there's stress or tension. If you're trying to make a point and you say something that's humorous and clever, it's almost like it's a double point.
Knowing how to use humor is a means of power and control. Power and control.
It's even inspired U.S. attorneys known for taking down the mob and fighting against corruption and for justice.
I should admit that I'm sort of a closet wannabe stand-up comic. I've always liked to tell jokes. I have the opportunity to do that when I do a live podcast. I'll do a few minutes of sort of remarks at the beginning to have a captive audience and pretend for like 5 minutes that I'm doing a tight five at a New York comedy club.
And it's been irresistible to your narrator.
A little leg disease, but that's fine. The doctor said, Donald, why is your blood so heavy? I said, probably from carrying the whole country on my back.
I'm Kavi Bharara. Welcome to Making Sense of Humor. In this documentary, we'll explore humor's transcendent role in politics, media, and everyday life. Through a number of enlightening conversations with historians, professors, actual comedians, late-night stars, and public figures, we'll explore how laughter isn't a break from politics, but a force inside it. Not a punchline, but a lever. We'll discuss how leaders use humor to steady nations, how comedians nick truth until it bleeds, and how ordinary people laugh to survive what would otherwise crush them. But to see why laughter moves people and sometimes history, we start at the beginning. For centuries, philosophers tried to explain laughter. Hobbes, Nietzsche, Plato, each saw something essential. Laughter does work. It bonds, releases pressure, and marks the boundaries of what a community permits. It is power. To discuss this, I spoke with author and professor of political science at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, Patrick Giammario, who authored Laughter as Politics, Critical Theory in an Age of Hilarity.
If you look at the work of some of the most famous and influential political philosophers throughout history, Plato, Hobbes, Nietzsche, laughter plays a key role in their philosophical projects. In fact, I found that it kind of appears at key moments in their arguments about how a political community ought to be organized, how people ought to behave as citizens.
Humor, however, wasn't always viewed so innocently.
Thomas Hobbes has surprisingly quite a bit to say about laughter. His claim is that laughter is what he calls sudden vainglory. We laugh at them because we feel more powerful than that person.
Humor has always revealed truths about power and people, and that hasn't just been confined to books and lecture halls. They live on in the words and wit of leaders, and perhaps no president grasped that better or used it more effectively than Abraham Lincoln. For Lincoln, humor wasn't decoration, It was survival, strategy, and statesmanship. To really grasp this, I spoke to one of the foremost authorities on Abraham Lincoln, Richard Carwardine, a distinguished historian and former president of Corpus Christi College, Oxford. His scholarship on Lincoln, including his book entitled Lincoln's Sense of Humor, is considered among the most influential of the last half-century.
I don't think he would have been the leader he was without that capacity to laugh at himself and to laugh at others. He often said, that here am I, I'm the least quarrelsome person. I mean, I've never wanted to quarrel. And here am I leading the nation in this struggle, in which over time, 750,000, 700,000 died as a result of a political quarrel over the nature of the Union. He says, humor is the vent of my moods and glooms. Without humor, I would not be able to survive. He says, I don't take alcohol, but I do find in humor and in jokes the equivalent of a stiff drink. It gives me life.
Preet Bharara, former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, echoed a similar thought.
It's called comic relief for a reason. It's relief from tension, anxiety, pain, suffering. So my view is the most important time where you need to keep a handle on humor and comedy and laughter is when times are very, very tough, tragic, and sad.
Lincoln's unique ability to employ humor also fostered a sense of relatability to his constituents, a theme we'll see throughout this documentary.
Humor was essential to his well-being, but it was also, as I say, an instrument. What comes across when people listen to Lincoln are a number of things. One is that he's utterly relatable. He's a common man. And ordinary people can see in Lincoln that here is someone who is on their wavelength, who understands them and who speaks to their condition.
Being a wartime president in a time where death and tragedy was constant, Lincoln was also a master at using his witty humor to diffuse and disarm tension.
For example, he's in a hospital and there is a soldier who is incapacitated and in bed and is being visited by a philanthropic young woman, tender age. And he's in bed because he has been shot through the testicles. And she says to the soldier, "Where were you shot?" The soldier is kind of embarrassed. He says, "Well, I was shot in Antietam." And she says, "No, but where were you shot?" And Lincoln has a quiet word with the soldier and discovers the truth. And he then turns to the young woman and says, "Well, madam, yes, the soldier appreciates your inquiry. I can tell you that the bullet that hit him would have missed you."
Fast forwarding over 100 years later, from the battlefields to the camera lights, another president, Ronald Reagan, would master the same art. Like Lincoln, he knew that the right joke at the right time could connect, calm, and even define a presidency.
I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Reagan blurred politics and performance. The smile, the timing, the feel-good quip that could lower a nation's pulse. I had the chance to speak with David Litt, who served as a senior speechwriter and head comedy writer for President Barack Obama, who we'll discuss shortly.
I would argue the two funniest presidents of sort of living memory were Reagan and Obama. And they're very, very different, not just in policy and temperament, but in the way they tell a joke. Reagan's jokes tended to be much more classic, a man and a horse walking to a bar kind of thing. And they often had a point to them, a moral at the end. And he was really good at telling those kinds of jokes. You almost have to be an entertainer, storyteller to get away with that.
Mike Devers, in his book, said that I had a short attention span. Well, I was going to reply to that, but what the hell, let's move on to something else.
I did a broadcast for a comedy store in Washington a few years ago when they were looking at the humor of presidents. In the end, it was a runoff between Lincoln and Reagan. We talked about the host, who is in fact a stand-up comedian, and I talked about their different styles of humor. I think Reagan was a narrative. He was a vaudevillian, basically. He was very good timing. and very good at sort of narrative stories. Certainly was very funny, and he could puncture a mood very easily.
The story was an American and a Russian arguing about their two countries, and the American said, look, in my country, I can walk into the Oval Office, I can pound the president's desk and say, Mr. President, I don't like the way you're running our country. And the Russian said, I can do that. The American said, you can? He says, yes. I can go into the Kremlin, to the General Secretary's office, pound his desk and say, Mr. General Secretary, I don't like the way President Reagan's running his country.
As Litt and Carradine mentioned, Reagan himself was often the target of his quips.
Today marks my first State of the Union address to you, a constitutional duty as old as our republic itself. President Washington began this tradition in 1790 after reminding the nation that the destiny of self-government and the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty is finally staked on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people. For our friends in the press who place a high premium on accuracy, let me say, I did not actually hear George Washington say that.
Reagan's gift was more than a knack for one-liners. It was the way he wove humor into the fabric of his leadership. His jokes weren't throwaway lines. They were tools of persuasion, moments that humanized policy, softened partisan edges, and made him relatable to millions. In an era of Cold War tension and domestic change, Reagan proved that a laugh could be as disarming as diplomacy. It's part of why he's remembered not only as the great communicator, but as a president who left behind a legacy shaped in no small part by his wit. And in the decades since, few leaders have blended humor and politics with as much intentional craft as another president, one whose comedic sensibility was forged in a very different way. That is Barack Obama.
4 years ago, I looked like this. Today, I look like this. And 4 years from now, I will look like this.
If you're writing jokes for a public figure, most of the time it doesn't go great, right? If you write a 10, then the delivery makes it like a 7. If you write a 7, the delivery makes it a 4. When I was writing for President Obama, it was the opposite. Right? No matter what you put on the page, his delivery and timing made it sound substantially better than the writing would have just on its own. I think there was a couple of reasons for that. One of the things President Obama was really good at in much more consequential settings than telling a joke was isolating the most important element of something and focusing on it. And I think delivering a joke requires that, right? You have to know where is the transition between the setup and the punchline. What is the word you have to hit in order to make it land? And the other thing about President Obama is before he was a president, he was a writer. He, often was a little bit busy. So if I was writing a speech about education policy, it wasn't that he was taking out the pen and editing every single line every time. But on jokes, he understood that you have to be more careful and precise than you would most of the time.
Recently, one of John's top advisors told the Daily News that if we keep talking about the economy, McCain's going to lose. So tonight I'd like to talk about the economy.
Indeed, President Obama was very involved in the joke writing process.
We had a joke once that was about how the Senate was all like a high school. And President Obama was like, I don't really get it. And I said, well, you kind of have to do it in Valley Girl voice. Like you have to say, so I was talking to John, he was talking to Lindsay, he was talking to Mitch, he was talking to Ted, and they were all like talking. And then President Obama gave me this look and was like, yeah, that'd be funny if a comedian did it. And I was like, okay, point taken, right? That joke's not going in the script.
I also think that Obama was one of the funnier presidents. Some of the jokes are can be very, very simple. And Obama was giving, I don't know if it was that speech or some other speech, when he was talking about the breakdown of bipartisanship, in the Senate, in politics in Washington generally. He's like, people will say to me, Barack, why don't you just have a drink with Mitch McConnell?
Right.
And he's like, you have a drink with Mitch McConnell. His best joke was apparently at some public birthday party for Rahm Emanuel, his chief of staff, someone who may run for president, who was very famously foul-mouthed, drops the F-bomb a lot. Rahm Emanuel famously, when he was young, working in a fast food restaurant, was working with a slicer, I think, and sliced off like the top half of his middle finger.
Oh, yeah.
And Obama's telling the story, he was at this accident, the top, sliced off the top half of his middle finger, thereby rendering him virtually mute.
Oh, oh my God.
Smart, right? Smart joke.
Hey, very witty there. When he wanted it to, Obama's humor could also be pointed, strategic, and aimed squarely at others. One frequent target, Donald Trump. From late-night appearances to public speeches, Obama often used Trump as the butt of his jokes, framing him less as a serious adversary and more as a punchline.
No one is prouder to put this birth certificate matter to rest than the Donald. And that's because he can finally get back to focusing on the issues that matter. Like, did we fake the moon landing? What really happened in Roswell? And where are Biggie and Tupac?
What I remember from that night is I was sitting in the cheap seats in that room, and I had a view of Trump, and I could see him turning beet red. And the other thing about that moment was that everyone in the room, Republicans and Democrats, were so excited to see him get taken down a peg, including people like Reince Priebus, who were there and went on to work for Trump, say he's the best president ever. But at the time, they were so excited to see him get, exposed in that way. And I think so it weirdly, while it was certainly a fun experience at the moment, it also, I think, shows the limits of humor in some of these contexts.
While Obama's jokes were undoubtedly lighthearted and playful, some still wonder whether that precise moment of humiliation sparked a certain fire within Trump, a desire to prove everyone wrong and run for president.
You got to be careful. If you make fun of someone in humiliating form, and everyone laughed,
yeah,
it could bite you in the political ass, which it kind of did. One could argue.
Years later, at another White House Correspondents' Dinner, he'd take the stage with a different type of comedic weapon, one borrowed from pop culture itself. Enter Keegan-Michael Kay and Jordan Peele's legendary Luther the Anger Translator sketch, brought to life in the East Room. As Obama delivered his trademark cool and measured remarks, Key's, quote, Luther stood beside him, blurting out the unfiltered frustration the president was, quote, really thinking.
Hold on to your lily white butts.
In our fast-changing world, traditions like the White House Correspondents' Dinner are important.
I mean, really? What is this dinner? And why am I required to come to it? Jeb Bush, do you really want to do this?
The fun part of that for me was getting to watch President Obama and Keegan rehearse in the White House, because they only got 2 rehearsals, but each time President Obama just couldn't stop laughing. And I remember watching him. I wasn't worried if the jokes were good or if people on the internet would like it. I did have this question of, is President Obama going to make it through these 5 minutes without breaking? And he did, to his credit. It was pretty fun to watch that.
Humor isn't just entertaining. It's a delivery system. Wrapped in a joke, an idea can land faster, stick longer, and reach people in ways a straight answer never could. With Obama, we saw this firsthand in 2014. The administration had been struggling to get young people to sign up for health coverage through healthcare.gov. Then Obama sat down with comedian Zach Galifianakis for a hilarious Between Two Ferns skit. Deadpan jokes, awkward questions, and over 30 million views later, traffic to the site skyrocketed. Humor, delivered side by side with a comedian, did what months of traditional outreach couldn't.
You said if you had a son, you would not let him play football. What makes you think that he would want to play football? What if he was a nerd like you?
Do you think a woman like Michelle would marry a nerd? Why don't you ask her whether she thinks I'm a nerd?
Could I?
No, I'm not going to let her near you.
So do you go to any websites that are .coms or .nets, or do you mainly just stick with .govs?
No, actually, we go to .govs. Have you heard of healthcare.gov?
Here we go. Okay, let's get this out of the way. What did you come here to plug?
Well, first of all, I think it's fair to say that I wouldn't be with you here today if I didn't have something to plug. Have you heard of the Affordable Care Act?
Oh yeah, I heard about that. That's the thing that doesn't work. Why would you get the guy that created the Zune to make your website?
Healthcare.gov works great now.
There were a couple of things that all came together at once, but I certainly didn't see it coming. I actually thought it was a bad idea, and I'm glad no one listened to me. The writing was just really good, right? It was really funny. You could hate Barack Obama and still be like, okay, that was pretty funny. The other thing that I think it did really well was, after being funny, it understood that you really only got one moment to say something serious, right? So President Obama basically almost like called time out, said, here's what I want you to know about healthcare.gov. You can get healthcare for under $100 in most cases if you're a young person, and you can go to this website and sign up for it, and the website works now. And though that was not overloading people with information.
What is it about humor, do you think, that I guess sort of makes it so effective at, tackling these sort of complex issues that you typically are associated with, very serious sort of audiences and serious conversations? Why do you think it's sort of able to allow people to talk about it, but in sort of a different way that's more relatable, I guess?
It shows you the world in a way you haven't seen the world, right? Yeah. And like a novel, which is fiction, you read it and you're like, oh, I guess I'm not the only person who's ever experienced this.
Yeah.
Other people have. And sometimes the humor can be very, very simple.
Thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean, another comedian-in-chief has shown how humor can be wielded as a political superpower. In Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, a former actor and satirist, didn't just bring laughter to audiences. He eventually brought it to the highest office in the country. And like Lincoln, Reagan, and Obama before him, he's proven that wit can be just as powerful as policy. To unpack this, I spoke with Jessica Pisano, professor of politics at the New School and an expert in authoritarianism, propaganda, and the politics of humor, with a particular focus on Russia and Eurasian study.
I started listening to Zelensky's performances on the stage back in the 1990s when I was first a student traveling and living in the former Soviet Union and Russia and Ukraine and trying to learn the language and really get to know the culture. And one of the ways I did that was to watch humor shows, because I figured if I could understand the jokes, then I would know that I really understood something about the place. He did comedy with his friends and participated in comedy competitions throughout the 1990s, which means both Russians and Ukrainians have known Zelensky longer than they've known Putin. They grew up watching and listening to him doing jokes on television. But his comedy really always had a kind of, I wouldn't say that it was necessarily political as such, but it always was about trying to bring people together by having them laugh at the challenges they faced in life. And that was part of his kind of trademark. And so his group, Kvartal 95, which then became a media company and then went on to be blockbuster shows, sort of along the lines of Saturday Night Live, where for a substantial portion of the population, everybody watched the show and knew the jokes. That was the main way that people knew Zelensky in both Ukraine and in Russia, because the show topped the charts in both countries.
Pisano delved into the authenticity that Zelensky brought to his people because of his comedic background.
I think it provided a breath of fresh air. When Zelensky came along, his authenticity and his ability to connect with people, and also his anti-corruption message, really resonated, and he took politics off the stage and back into the streets. The joke was on the incumbent politicians, not on the population.
While there's nothing funny about what is going on in modern-day Ukraine, I asked Pisano if Zelensky has been able to create a sense of national unity through his humor.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note that it's the type of comedy he was performing, right? So the jokes that he and his group told were all about bringing people together by laughing at problems that they all faced. Zelensky's and his troops' comedy really was about validating people's local identities in different parts of Ukraine, people who were not predisposed to see each other as compatriots or people who had anything in common. By telling jokes about the challenges that they faced, his troupe really managed to create a sense of national unity and national identity, organized not around nationalism, but around a kind of patriotism where people acknowledged that their country had some problems, but that they all were part of a group that could laugh together at their problems, as opposed to laughing at each other.
Humor in Zelensky's hands became more than performance. It was resilience.
In some ways, Zelensky's humor is a soldier's humor. It's a way of using laughter to maintain courage, to face down fear amidst objectively really scary situations. He's working out of a national tradition in which, in Ukraine, school children memorize a poem written by a 19th century poet, Lesya Ukrainka, that has a Latin title, Contra Spem Spero, I will hope against hope. And it's all about laughing in the face of challenges. You know, she says, I'm going to laugh through tears. I'm going to sing songs through hardship. In some ways, it has a lot in common with American gospel traditions.
If Volodymyr Zelensky built trust and unity through warmth and wit, the next figure built a brand on something a little sharper. You may know him for the art of the deal, but he's also mastered the art of the insult. President Donald J. Trump.
Laughter can be liberatory, subversive, emancipatory, but it can also be a form in which power exercises itself.
Trump is as controversial as he is captivating, and one of the most naturally funny political communicators of our time. His rallies and speeches are loaded with quick jabs, punch-down zingers, and off-the-cuff one-liners that send his base into fits of laughter. It's humor as a political weapon, part showmanship, part stand-up, and for millions of his supporters, utterly irresistible, even if possibly offensive and infuriating for others.
Donald Trump facing new criticism for something he did on the campaign trail last night in South Carolina while defending his debunked claim that he saw thousands of Muslims celebrate the collapse of the Twin Towers here in New York. He appeared to mock a reporter with a disability. Take a look.
Written by a nice reporter. Now the poor guy, you got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember. He's going like, I don't remember. Oh, maybe that's what I said. This is 14 years ago. They didn't do a retraction.
Trump's relationship to laughter is fascinating because he's a very skilled insult comic.
I think his response, his visceral response to attack people on their appearance, short, tall, fat, ugly. My goodness, that happened in junior high. Are we not way above that? Would we not all be worried to have someone like that in charge of the nuclear arsenal?
Mr. Trump.
I never attacked him on his look, and believe me, there's plenty of subject matter right there.
So, I don't care for Donald Trump in many ways, but I don't underestimate him. Yeah. And he's got skills. Like a lot of liberals don't like to say that. He does.
Tough guy, Jeb.
And we need to have a leader that is real tough. You're never going to be president of the United States by insulting your way to the presidency.
Let's see. I'm at 42 and you're at 3, so far I'm doing better.
Doesn't matter.
It's a great, great tool and asset that he has. He was asked once, and I saw how people found this hilarious if you supported him. He said, why do you call it the China virus? Right? Because it comes from China. And you know what? People thought that was freaking hilarious, and I can respect why people thought that.
Chuck Schumer is here looking very glum. Doesn't he look glum? He looks glum. But look on the bright side, Chuck, considering how woke your party has become. If Kamala loses, you still have a chance to become the first woman president.
Litt voiced that Trump's humor redefines limits and boundaries.
But I think some of this stuff is unique to Trump, where he gets away with, for whatever reason, being completely, I would call it unhinged, right? Like he says stuff that we in a million years would never have said. And that when J.D. Vance says it, people are like, oh, that's really uncomfortable, right? So it does seem like Trump, and to his credit, I guess, plays by a different set of rules.
Despite his own sense of humor, a modern strongman like Trump does not like when he is the center of a joke or jab. And these days, late-night television seems to be the center of these anti-Trump jokes. And interestingly enough, Stephen Colbert's Late Show, arguably the flagship of American political comedy, announced its cancellation. On the surface, the network said it was for financial reasons, but with its high ratings, many doubt this.
I was addicted to late night shows, so I think it's a shame that Colbert's show is canceled. Not only he's been canceled, but it sounds like that whole idea of a show that's been running consecutively on that network for decades is gone. I don't know if it was because of Trump or not, but it's a shame.
Trump styles himself as a strongman, and for a strongman leader, you don't make fun of yourself, and you don't let anyone else make fun of you, right? That's why Colbert pissed Trump off so much, and I think the more we know, the more clear it became that Trump specifically, or at least either appreciated Colbert getting canceled a great deal, or actually pushed for it.
Colbert, also skeptical of the news, and seeing Trump's blunt reaction to it, fired right back.
On Friday, Donald Trump posted, "I absolutely love that Colbert got fired. His talent was even less than his ratings." How dare you, sir? Would an untalented man be able to compose the following satirical witticism? Go yourself.
I also spoke with Brian Kiley, an Emmy-winning award comedy writer and stand-up veteran whose career includes over 30 years on Conan and writing for some of the biggest names in late-night television.
I think, and the fact that he's first in the ratings and they still canceled him, it's just a shame. It's really outrageous, I think. So, but as you go through life, you realize that the big people are going to step on the little people, and it's just going to happen over and over, and it's, what are you going to do?
In fact, just as Kiley states, throughout history, authoritarian leaders and strongmen have understood that laughter can be dangerous, especially when it's aimed at them. A well-placed joke can puncture their image, undermine their authority, and rally dissent. That's why, in many regimes, humor isn't just discouraged, it's censored, silenced, or punished.
Laughter kind of has its own sort of political energy that defeats authoritarians.
Right.
And I think what became clear very quickly, and it's certainly clear now, that's one modality that laughter can take.
And in several recent examples from throughout the globe, we can see the suppression of humor happen right in front of us. When a cartoon bear becomes a political threat, you know a regime takes humor seriously. In China, memes comparing Xi Jinping to Winnie the Pooh disappeared. Christopher Robin was blocked from theaters, and comedian Lee Aoshi was arrested for a military joke. The state scrubs ridicule to protect the leader's image. In North Korea, there's no such thing as a harmless joke. Mocking the Kim dynasty, even in private, can be treated as treason. Defectors tell stories of neighbors disappearing for an offhand remark, of people imprisoned or often executed for a stray laugh at the leader's expense. Humor here is not just censored, it's weaponized as loyalty. From childhood, citizens are taught that the only acceptable punchline is one that glorifies the regime. And so, a smile is safe only when it serves the state. In Russia, laughter is permitted, but only when it targets the right people. In 2015, comedian Idrak Mirzalideh was jailed over an ethnic stereotype joke. Since the invasion of Ukraine, even memes can bring arrest. Comedy still airs on state TV, but it's weaponized, aimed at the West, never at Putin.
The lineage of that goes all the way back, at least to the Greeks. If you look at some of the plays of Sophocles, there's a continuing theme throughout there where for the character that comes to mind is Creon, who is the king, and he's constantly afraid of people laughing at him. He says, "I will not be laughed at." So there is this aversion that sovereigns, those who are claiming power and authority over a political community, have to being laughed at by the members of that political community. It's seen as a threat to their authority.
If dictators and authoritarians are so quick to shut humor down, it's because they know how dangerous it can be. Comedy doesn't just make people laugh. It pokes holes in power. It punches up. When it's aimed up at those in charge, humor becomes a kind of resistant, one that cuts through fear.
I think that the best humor doesn't punch down, it punches up.
Yeah.
You can go back to Voltaire or Mark Twain, or even in ancient Greece in their comedies, you know, the slave would outsmart the master and whatever, and that was part of their comedic tradition 3,000 years ago.
We spent a lot of time looking at humor in politics, how it is wielded on the biggest stages by the most powerful people, presidents, prime ministers, and world leaders. But humor doesn't stop at politics. It transcends politics. In fact, it may be at its most powerful outside of it. Because when we strip away the campaigns and the speeches, what we're left with is something much more universal, everyday humor. The kind of humor that cuts across background, beliefs, and divides, because it belongs to all of us. And that's exactly the lane Brian Kiley lives in.
I do think political humor has its place, and I certainly am not denigrating people that do that. I think to me, it's kind of about what your passion is. Do you know what I mean? And what you think about. And to me, you know, I'm much more interested in talking about my family, and that's more that I'm passionate about than politics. And I get sick of Trump, to be honest. It's just that I feel like we've had this conversation a million times, and it's not helping.
Ladies and gentlemen, my next guest tonight is a very funny comedian. He's been on the show before, and we insisted on having him back. Folks, please welcome Brian Kiley. Thanks very much. This is really a very big time for me. I found out recently that my wife's going to have our first little baby. Oh, thanks. Oh, stop. Oh, thanks. It was nothing, but thanks. Well, it's funny. She wasn't feeling well, and I didn't think anything of it. Then she started throwing up every morning and putting on weight, and then it occurred to me. She's got a drinking problem.
Everyday, non-political humor is actually arguably the most unifying.
These days, we're in such a divisive time. I really haven't seen it this divisive my whole life. And I think that humor lets us know that we actually have much more in common than we realize sometimes. We have sort of the same anxieties, but the same sort of daily annoyances. Teenagers are the worst. The other day, my little girl talked back to my wife. My wife told her to do something. She said, no, I don't want to. I had to pull her aside and say, listen, you got to teach me how to do that. And I'm happily married. I know that I'm lucky because 50% of married people say they're unhappily married. This is according to a poll I took earlier today at my house. What's her problem? But I know for me, when I've been depressed, things that made me laugh, I'm so grateful for that. I remember being really depressed when I was younger, and I watched Monty Python, and I laughed so hard, and I was so grateful to those guys for doing that for me, you know?
Yeah. It's a coping mechanism, sort of, right?
Yeah, I think so. It connects people because it's like, hey, I'm experiencing that same thing, and that's the reason I'm laughing is because I'm relating to what your life is about.
I also had the chance to speak with Craig Kilborn, the legendary late-night host, comedian, and broadcaster. Kilborn was the original host of The Daily Show, the guy who helped invent the entire format of satirical news that would later be carried on by Jon Stewart, Trevor Noah, and so many others. Before that, he was a Sports Center anchor at ESPN and later the host of The Late Late Show on CBS. I asked him why he left the late-night business at such a young age.
It was an easy decision, and most people don't understand it, but I left for creatively. I got bored with late night. I could see that it was all of my writers were very political. They were heavily into politics, and I just don't want to talk politics. I think I'm very level-headed. I joke that I'm the most level-headed man in America sometimes because I can see the positives on both sides, and I'm right in the middle. But there's also a thing called social commentary, and I wasn't interested in any of that.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Craig Kilborn. This is, how was that open? Was that open okay?
Fairly strong.
Fairly strong. This is my last show, ladies and gentlemen. And, excuse me for a second.
People love the jokes about current events in pop culture. And so my humor was more irreverent, where you'd have the traditional jokes, and then I liked irreverent humor, which I would have a non sequitur and I'd dance, dance, dance.
All I want to do is dance, dance, dance.
As I tell the young people, breathe out the bitterness. Life is
Right.
joyous, you know?
Even as a former tough federal prosecutor, Bharara agrees.
So I believe, for a lot of reasons, humor is and laughter is absolutely essential to living a good life, to surviving bad times, to accentuating and having greater highlights in good times. Every once in a while, someone will complain and say, how can you make jokes at a time like this? Country's in trouble. Trump is the president. There are wars going on. I'm like, that's exactly when you need humor. When life is great and everybody is rich and everyone is healthy and super secure, you don't need a lifeline. The lifeline term you use is a good one and the right one. You got to be able to laugh at those times and seek out laughter in those times.
Bharara would even use humor at press conferences when announcing serious charges. Here, charges of corruption were brought against Malcolm Smith, and Preet wasn't shy to crack a joke.
And then, of course, you have Malcolm in the middle.
Indeed, after being fired by Trump in 2017, Bharara started his popular podcast, Stay Tuned with Preet, where he'd often go on the road with live shows. And at these shows, he made it a point to start with some stand-up.
If you understand how sort of tight-knit Indian immigrant families are, you don't want your parents to be surprised when they see you and you look different. So, I'm also a senior legal analyst on CNN, and I took a week by the Jersey Shore to write a couple of chapters of my book and just sort of not do other things and focus on writing. And at the end of that time, I decided, I have this stuff on my face, I might as well keep it. And then I had an appearance on CNN, and I realized I hadn't told them that I had grown facial hair. And my parents are very sweet and supportive, but I just wanted to let them know. And so here's the text exchange. So I say, warning, I'm unshaven. And my very supportive mother replied as follows. My mother said, my son is always look handsome. Then my dad weighed in. My dad replied, I could not listen. What are you talking? Just watching your face. What happened? You didn't have time? Or you want to look like that?
And he continued to turn to humor when the pandemic hit in 2020.
At the beginning of the pandemic, in 2020 on the podcast, I had on epidemiologists and I had on policy makers who would talk about the ravages of the disease and the necessity for a vaccine and all this serious stuff. And then I realized who I want on the podcast. This is in the first 2 or 3 weeks. Mike Birbiglia.
Oh, yeah. That was my next question, actually.
Oh, he's a great comedian.
It's good.
I've seen him in multiple one-man shows. I first met him at the Montreal Comedy Festival, where I think he won Comic of the Year.
Oh, wow.
Because it was important. While there was all this uncertainty, all this tragedy, all this crisis, all this loneliness, all this separation, all this foreboding, to talk to a person about those things, but also with an eye towards, getting people to laugh.
Throughout history, humor and laughter has carried a weight far heavier than the joke itself. It has cut down bullies and tyrants, steadied leaders in moments of crisis, and given people the courage to keep going when everything else seemed uncertain. From Lincoln's stories to Zelensky's resilience, from the sharp edge of satire to the comfort of shared humor, comedy has always revealed truths that politics alone can't reach. In an age of division, it remains one of the few forces that can both expose power and bring people together, reminding us that even in the hardest times, laughter endures.